The community is erupting with ideas about which carts and the characters in Mario Kart World are the fastest. There's talks of hidden stats, water speed, specialists, and even character-specific nerfs. The discoveries in these areas are amazing, but there's an elephant in the room that everyone is carefully avoiding. How fast are carts anyways? Without a concrete idea about the speed of carts and their difference in speed, it is hard to be confident about which carts are faster, and even hard to determine how much faster they are. Finding this data is a nigh impossible task with only two known methods of doing so: data mining and statistics. Data mining is by far superior. After all, figuring out the laws of the universe is easy when you can just look up the code that determines whether Schrodinger's cat is alive or dead. Unfortunately, this level of data mining is unlikely for the near future. And even basic data mining like the speed stat of each combo may not tell us the actual relative speed of each combination. This leaves the much harder road: statistics. Driving down the same road with the same cart dozens of times and logging each time. This is a slow and very boring method, and no content creator with half a brain would want to waste their time on this, although Austin Plays is at least attempting to crowdsource something similar. Worst of all, the speed difference between combos can be less than 1%, meaning being off by a single frame can invalidate hours of work. So, what do you get when you spend a week developing a rigorous speed testing method and running hundreds of trials? Well, you get results. When you look at the character select screen, you'll notice that the speed stat for Bowser in the pipe frame is more than twice as large as the Lakitu in the same cart. Does this mean Bowser is twice as fast? Although intuitive, this would be terrible game design. In the time it takes Lakitu to beat 1 lap, Bowser would have already done 2 laps. So what is a real speed stat? In terms of bars of speed on the character selection screen, the actual speed stat should be about 74 extra bars. That would mean Lakitu in the pipe frame has 75 bars of speed, while Bowser in the same car has 76 bars of speed, making Bowser about 1.5% faster than Lakitu. At least this is how it would work in Mario Kart 8. And surprisingly, it seems that the formula still holds strong. How can I be so confident that speed is unchanged? How can I claim to be the only one who's accurately calculated the speed of Mario Kart World? The answer is twofold. I have a much more rigorous approach and much more rigorous analysis method. The game seems to track distance internally, as it gives you stickers that based on how many kilometers you have driven. Unfortunately, we can't access this information without a memory reader. Time Trial also has a visible counter that can normally be used to reliably track the time it takes to drive a set distance. Unfortunately, random noise is added to the millisecond counter. This was likely done so the same millisecond values weren't constantly repeated, but it also means that counting video frames is more accurate than using the timer. So the only option to record a time per set distance is manual timings using reference points. To make matters more complicated, finding a consistent method is difficult. Say you start the timer when the back of the cart crashes the finish line and end it when the cart eventually bonks into a wall. This sounds like a decent estimate, but there's a confounding factor: size. Bowser in a B-Dasher is much larger than Lakitu in a pipe frame, so Lakitu will have to drive an extra pipe frame of distance to travel the same distance as Bowser and bonk into the wall. This means that any timing method must also be the same no matter which cart and character are used. Many people use reference points from the camera's point of view for their timing method. It's simple and intuitive. Start the timer when the finish line disappears from view, and stop the timer when another arbitrary object disappears from view. There's nothing technically wrong with these methods, but there's a hidden pitfall: perspective. Say you start the timer when the finish line disappears and end the timer when the straight light leaves the camera's view. These two objects are not parallel compared to the cart, meaning that any change of the camera's height or angle could change the distance needed for these two events to happen. Therefore, I chose to start the timer based on the finish line and end the timer based on the rectangular crosswalk paint later in the straightway. These two objects are both embedded into a flat road and their edges are parallel. Based on preference, I also use shadows rather than the camera. Because of how far away the sun is, any object hit by the sun will cast the same shadow for any relatively small distance. In this case, relatively small is a few dozen miles. Therefore, I can start the timer when the shadow of the cart is completely on the finish line, and end the timer when the shadow of the cart completely leaves the crosswalk point later on. But what about fixed speed? Being able to record the time it takes to go from one shadow to the next is really nice, and surprisingly nostalgic. After all, who hasn't tried to jump from shadow to shadow as a kid? But this distance has no real meaning, and as a result, we have no idea how fast the speed is. Luckily, developers get lazy and sometimes add a quality of life feature without thinking about what it really means. This is where Rewind comes in, the most broken mechanic in the game. Trying to practice a difficult strat and don't want to restart the race every attempt? Rewind has you covered, allowing you to return back to where you were. It does not seem to save whether you are in a mini turbo or speed at a given time, but at least it's quick and always retraces your steps. It's also extremely smooth, as the rewind feature rewinds at a constant speed after a few frames of startup, just like a cassette tape. And this is where the dev's laziness granted us a free speedometer, a constant speed that covers the same distance, and likely at an integer multiple of whatever metric the developers use. The speed used in Mario Kart 7 and 8 is based on units per frame. We don't know how many units per frame the rewind feature drives at, but we can declare the rewind to work at 1 rewind unit per frame. This would give every kart a speed between 0 and 1, which is hard to read. So we can multiply this result by 100 to get a base of 100 center rewind units per frame, or crupf. Now, this is where most other content creators stop. Near frame perfect should be good enough, right? And if you are simply trying to figure out which of two characters that might be faster on a given track, this might be right. However, I'm looking for speed. Exact speed. Additionally, the game is divided into 60 world updates per second, or 60 frames per second. This means that we can have two different time readings depending on our start position. We can either drive the distance up to 1 frame too fast, or drive up to 1 frame too slow. Therefore, we have to repeat trials dozens of times to not only determine what 2 frames the time falls between, but we also have to approximate how many parts of a frame it takes a car to finish a trial. Even a difference of half a frame can be the difference between the speed of Mario and Luigi in the same kart. So, we just test each combination a few dozen times and average out the speed, right? Unfortunately, there are 53 characters and 41 karts. This means I would have to test over 2,000 combinations, and I wouldn't be able to use the previously tested combinations to estimate the speed on a new combination. There must be some way to simplify the speed calculation, right? The character selection has a visible speed stat, so we can try plotting the speed stat versus measured trial speeds. Unfortunately, that screen lies to you in a terribly unintuitive way. For example, the B-Dasher is just as fast as the real racer in Crown City, despite the real racer having a much higher speed stat. Additionally, Bowser and Wario have the same measured speed of 51.2 cruf in the standard kart, despite Bowser supposedly being a faster character. I tried to control for these speed discrepancies using statistical tests, but at a certain point I had to test every character in every kart, and that just brought us back to the worst case scenario. There is luckily a way to compare karts and characters without assuming the speed stat, albeit a less efficient way. We can create something called a categorical variable that creates a different speed category for every kart and every character. This still means we can calculate the speed of a given kart even when we use a different character, or the speed of a character even on trials that use different karts. However, it also means temporarily giving up on determining how much speed the additional bars in the character screens give you. Using this method, I found that the base speed of Lakiti on the pipe is 50 cruf, or nearly half the speed of the rewind feature. And although we can't trust the speed stat anymore, we can see that Mario having 2/5 of a bar more than Lakiti gives him 0.4 extra cruf. This might mean that each bar's speed is about 1 cruf. But this analysis had some anomalies. Luigi is thought to be 1/5 of a speed bar slower than Mario, but is only approximately 0.12 cruf slower. Additionally, the standard kart is around 0.467 cruf faster than the pipe frame, but the standard kart is 3/5 of a bar faster than the pipe frame, so this should be 0.6 cruf. This could be statistical error, but even the statistical tests don't line up. Unless there are synergies between characters, this analysis should be accurate to the nearest 10th of a cruf. Later, it was found that the fastest and slowest characters has kart-specific synergies, but I had also thrown out these characters for analyses and ended up with the same results. Luckily, people were already hunting down the hidden stats that the character screen does not show. All these charts were still a bit off though. After all, the difference in speed has already been established to be hard to differentiate, but it's much better than the character screen's stats. Cryptic made the first major leap forward. Although something was still off, he claimed that BB Mario and Lakitu had different speeds, but my analyses had shown no major difference in the speed between the two. The sheet was later improved by a few Discord members of the time trial and speedrunning communities, specifically Pop2Pop making a slightly improved sheet, Elastic C testing out additional combos, and Delta and Bento apparently helping with additional hidden stats. Using their speed stat spread, I got an amazing fit to my personal trial records, meaning I could finally do some real statistical analysis. Using the TT Discord spreadsheet, I found that the base speed is 49.188 cruf, plus or minus 1/20th of a cruf. And every bar speed, when hidden stats are accounted for, accounts for 2/3 of a cruf, plus or minus 1/40th of a cruf. This is a suspiciously clean comparison between cruf and bars of speed, but why wouldn't the developers choose an even decimal for their speed stat? This is when I had to look up a major assumption. Up until now, I had thought that the speed of rewind was about 10 units per frame, but what if that was false? What if it was actually 15 units per frame? At this point, everything clicked into place. If we assume rewind happens at 15 units per frame, then 1 bar speed would be 0.1 units per frame. Additionally, the default speed would be around 7.5 units per frame. This is exactly the same as Mario Kart 8. Although their speed bars were split into 4 parts, whereas Mario Kart World's speed bar was split into 5. This leaves a very intuitive conclusion. Speed in Mario Kart World is nearly exactly the same as it is in Mario Kart 8, and presumably 7. Everything made sense again. So to answer the original question, this means that every bar of speed increases your relative speed by around 1.3% over pipe frame Lakitu. More research needs to be done to know the exact base speed at 0 bars, but Mario Kart World can finally have a concrete metric to compare kart speed to. Or at least it almost does. Every fifth of a bar, or one speed class on the spreadsheet, should equate to about 0.02 units per frame. However, the standard kart seems to be 0.07 units per frame faster than the pipe frame Lakitu. Does this mean there are additional speed classes between the ones currently on the spreadsheet? Could the speed bar on the character selection screen be split into 10 parts rather than the same 5? There's still much more research about hidden stats in Mario Kart World to do, and I'm excited to see how the community at large tackles the remaining hurdle.